Awesome. We're recording. We're back at it again with another episode of Hunter's Legacy. And I think we got a new state we're getting at today. So where are we at today, Hunter?
What's going on, Mitch? We are actually in Ontario, Canada today, and representing Pennsylvania as well.
You're a Canadian, eh?
No, no, I am a Canadian permanent resident. My lawyers keep trying to get me to get citizenship, but I'm passing that up. That American citizenship is very liquidable in Canada, if you will.
Really? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, my lawyers were kind of weird about it because I thought dual citizenship was doable, but our immigration lawyers that we had hired when I moved up here, they seemed to, I don't know what the word is without getting in trouble. They weren't the greatest, so they told me that dual citizenship is actually not a thing anymore. Which everything I've looked up, it's still absolutely a thing. It's kind of a confusing situation, but nonetheless, even if dual citizenship was a thing, I get all the perks by being a permanent resident. I still get the healthcare. So it's just a little extra money to get something that I don't see much value in.
So you're a U.S. citizen still.
Yeah, so I kept my US citizenship and then I just became, you can go through a process and become what's called a permanent resident. So you still, as a permanent resident, you still get the free healthcare. You're basically getting everything a normal born and raised Canadian would get, minus the passport. And after getting permanent residency, it made the border a lot more feasible crossing every time. Before I had that, I was going through the ringer. You know, I've been checked, searched in places. They've searched me in places my wife has never seen, you know. I went through one especially.
I don't need to hear the details on this, man.
Yeah, understandably.
So how'd you end up in Canada?
This is actually where my wife is from. She's from a town outside of London, Ontario, and it's called Dorchester. So she's from here, and she of course won that battle. So here we are. Yeah, I tried for a long time to convince her to come back to the States, but I don't think I don't think that's going to be feasible. But
How'd you end up meeting her?
funny enough, I was actually working on the set of Undercover Billionaire. I was doing a stint with the Discovery Channel, and I was on the production team, and they were actually filming in my hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. And this was right at the beginning of COVID. So even though I lived 10 minutes down the road, the entire team was staying at one of the local hotels in Erie. And because I couldn't leave the hotel, I was sitting on my phone. I had Tinder. And funny enough, as I'm in Erie, Pennsylvania, and she's in Dorchester, Ontario, we actually matched. And after talking for a couple weeks, I asked her if she wanted to go to Olive Garden. And she said, "Where the heck do we have an Olive Garden anywhere near us?" I said, "They're all over. What do you mean?" And that's when I found out she was from a town I had never heard of in a whole different country. So turns out the radius on Tinder is as the crow flies. If it wasn't for Lake Erie, I think we'd live a half hour apart, but because of the lake, we live a good 4 hours or so, give or take.
I figure you're using old passport mode.
I didn't. I don't know. I must have. I must have put it on anybody who's willing and able because we were fairly shocked, you know. And at that time, the border had actually just shut down by the time we had matched. So it's a crazy story how it all ended up working out. But here we are in Dorchester, Ontario, and yeah, it's been quite the experience to say the least. But I guess I'm proof that Tinder actually can work. We actually just had our firstborn, Lincoln. He is 9 months old, and yeah, everything's been going great.
How far away from Canada were you where you grew up?
Well, I actually grew up in Austintown, Ohio, just outside of Youngstown. But grade in fourth grade, we moved to Erie, Pennsylvania. So from Erie, to the border, the Buffalo, New York Peace Bridge border. That's about roughly 2 hours, almost right on the mark from where I was living prior to that. Um, from my place to her place, that was roughly 4 hours.
Okay. It's funny how stuff works out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing, man. I was struggling when I first got here. We moved into I'm not the kind of guy that enjoys living in a city. Never wanted to, and when we got an apartment in the city, it was okay because we lived on a park with a river running through, and the river is filled with every species imaginable. So I was fishing every day. But in 6 months, my vehicle in an underground parking garage was broken into 7 times. So I had a really warm welcome and started to really understand how bad the homelessness situation in London was. But since we got out of the city, it's certainly been far better.
Cool deal. So fill me in a little bit. So you grew up Ohio, we're in Pennsylvania a little bit. When did you get started hunting?
I think I was hunting before I could walk. Truthfully, I was very fortunate at a very young age. My dad was he was kind of coming off of his high in the hunting world. Um, he didn't start hunting until he was about, I want to say 17. My brother's godfather ended up taking him out. They were best buds, and his name's Joey. Joey grew up, born and raised hunting. So Joey and his father took my dad out on a pheasant hunt, and from there, my dad just kind of engulfed his entire lifestyle into it. You know, he would go on the hunting trips. Went out to I think it was, I want to say New Brunswick, maybe. I always get this wrong, but he went up for a caribou hunt. He's gone on flying bear hunts, a little bit of everything. When my older brother was born, kind of slowed him down. When I was born, really slowed him down. But he would always tell me by the time I was talking, all I wanted to talk about was hunting and deer and turkeys, especially. So he was starting to get the drive in, and he said as soon as I could walk, he was taking me on walks in the woods. And he actually, some of my earliest memories, we had these little tyke bows. Basically, you're shooting real small arrows out of it, and we thought if we could hit a squirrel, we would actually be able to harvest it. You know, he didn't care about shooting a deer when he was bringing us out. He just wanted to make sure that we were going to be having the time of our lives and trying to get us hooked that way, which it worked entirely on me and then some. My older brother kind of stepped out of it, but I've been talking a lot about all of my experiences recently, and he's kind of getting the itch to get back into it. So, long story short, as long as I could remember, I've been hooked. You know,
So what kind of hunting did your dad do before you started?
he was really big into deer mostly, and waterfowl as well. He wasn't necessarily the kind of guy like, today a lot of people will preach hunt the wind. I think my dad still to this day, no matter what I tell him, he'll go out. He has no idea what the wind is. He's got a certain spot in the corner of a field. He's gonna carry in his blind, put it up, tear it down the same day. He doesn't necessarily care if he shoots something. He's got the mindset of I got out better than sitting on the couch, you know. But big into ducks, small game, deer. And even at a young age, we had this big decoy bag. We would carry 2 to 3 dozen decoys in. And I remember throwing that over my shoulder. Even over my shoulder, it's still dragging on the ground behind me. But he's like, I'll carry the decoys. And no, if I can't shoot, I want to carry the decoys. That was kind of like my thing, you know? Felt good about that.
How long were you going with him before you started to actually like put a gun in your hand? He was actually taking you hunting instead of just you watching him.
Like I said, from the time I could walk until the first time I had a gun in my hands, I would say I don't know if I could get in trouble for saying this story. However, nothing ended up happening regardless, but uh, regardless, I want to say 7 or 8. We were actually walking back from a waterfowl hunt, and my dad looked out and he saw a muskrat sitting on a log on this swamp we were walking the edge of. And he had his Mossberg 500 12 gauge, still has it to this day. And he said, "Do you see that muskrat?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you wanna take your first harvest?" I'm like, "Oh God, oh God." I start freaking out, and I've never shot a 12 gauge at that point. And as a little kid, I actually used to be scared of the kick of a gun. So I shoulder the gun and I'm shaking like a leaf. And I had told my dad, I was like, "Well, I don't see it anymore." He goes, "Listen, buddy, if you shoot this, I'll get it mounted however you want. We'll put it up on the wall. Like this is your opportunity." And I was like, I don't see it anymore. And I certainly saw it. I was just scared. But that was the first time I had a gun in my hands. And then I actually went out opening day when I was 12. I believe I was 12. Opening day of rifle season in Pennsylvania. I walked down the road, and this was actually a property that my dad had harvested his first buck on. And funny enough, opening day, I go down, and the landowner stops me on the way down. He's like, "Yeah, I'd sit up in this corner. They'll get them going down by 4 Mile, and you might have one come across you." So I go up there, and within 20 minutes, I look up and I see this raggedy 7 point, sorry, raggedy 5 point. And he's just staring at me. I had no idea he was there. I just looked up. There he is, 20 yards away. And I had, at that time, my uncle's shotgun because it had a red dot on it. And the gun that I had, I didn't have my rifle yet at that time. I actually was using my 12 gauge slug gun. But I was like, "Oh, I like that red dot." And he's like, "Here, take it out opening day." So I just pull up. I'm sitting in the corner of this field, 20 yards, staring at this buck. And I pull up, I shoot, and I accidentally spined the buck, but he had dropped instantly, and he actually let out a buck roar, which was the wildest thing as a 12-year-old. And I remember sitting there, I was like in awe, to say the very least. I couldn't believe what had just happened, but I had called my dad, and I'm freaking out. And he was napping. We had just got back home from the morning hunt, and I said, "Let's go down to Bob's." "No, I got to take a nap, but you could go on down." And that was the first time I had ever hunted by myself, and that was a heck of an experience, to say the least.
So, whatever happened to this muskrat?
The muskrat survived, man. The muskrat that I claimed to not see anymore after getting the pin on him with the shotgun. Um, I told my dad, "I just can't do this anymore. I can't do this. I can't shoot. I don't see him anymore. Here, take the gun." And for him, he was, I'm sure, looking back at it now, I'm sure he was probably upset, not necessarily disappointed. He was just excited to see that first harvest that we all dream our children making one day. But
He raised a wussy.
yeah, right. He really did on that end. I remember going to a turkey shoot, and I had a little Rossi 20 gauge. He had bought us one of those Rossi sets, the 3 barrels, and it was a 22, 243, and a 20 gauge. And I shot the 20 a couple times, no issues, but I wouldn't shoot the 12 gauge that day. And he's telling me the same thing. He's like, "Listen, buddy," kind of poking fun at me. And ultimately, ended up harvesting my first animal with a 12 gauge. But yeah, that muskrat, he still brings that up every now and then, and says, "Just imagine you could have a muskrat on the wall." I'm like, "Yeah, geez, you're getting me on that one." I haven't seen too many mounted muskrats, but that'd be pretty unique.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about your first hunt, but how old were you when you really just started going after it pretty hard by yourself, setting up tree stands?
I actually had by the next year after that, the bug just entirely ate me up. So even prior to shooting that buck, this property was just down the street from where I had lived, and the owner's name was Bob, and he was the kindest guy in the world. When we first moved to Erie, the neighborhood kids all knew him. He was single man, lived in this crazy house in the middle of the woods, and he had built this 4-story deck that goes down the cliff into the woods in his backyard. And we would always go over and just hang out in the woods, and he would always come out, wave at us, and him and I ended up becoming very, very close. He was kind of like a grandfather to me in many ways. And I love seeing him, and I would go down to that property every single day, and I would just go up and scout. So I had set 3 different stands in the summer following harvesting my first buck. And 2 of them I told myself, like, okay, you could only hunt this stand during the rut, and you can only hunt that stand in the late season. Looking back, there's absolutely no rhyme or reason as to why I picked either of those to only be the rut stand or only be the late season stand, but the one that made sense was the observation stand, and I would go back there literally every single day after work, or sorry, after school, and I just sit there, man. There's just something about being in the woods that I just felt like I was at home. So I started to really get eaten up with that, and I started kind of trying to understand deer movement and different personalities just by doing that. You watch all these different deer come out, and you can start to see over time, even at a young age, how deer will react differently, how one buck will react to something entirely different from the way another buck would, or so on and so forth. So even prior to even all of this too, as a little kid, if you asked a second grader, what do you want to be when you grow up? They're going to tell you a president or an astronaut. We actually have a thing at my parents' house of a bunch of my like little kid schoolwork, and my answer was a professional hunter.
Hunter wants to be a hunter.
Yeah, it is. I was actually named very properly because, of course, I'm eaten up with hunting. I'm a hunting guide, and then my last name is my zodiac sign, which I'm not big into zodiac signs by any means, but I always thought that was pretty neat. But yeah, I mean, I've always been that kid that's watching every single series of Real Trees. Uh, wow, the name is actually slipping my head. I could tell you every single buck shot on it. The Real Tree Big Bucks. I know that's not the name. Regardless, I mean, every single hunting show that I could get my hands on, and the Sportsman's Channel and the Outdoor Channel were on every single day. And to this day, my wife is hearing quacking. She'll be in the bedroom going to bed and tell me to turn down the TV because she hears quacking on it, or, wild boar screeching. Just anything and everything, man. It's just been my entire life. It's all I could think of.
She probably thinks you're watching something different with the wild boar screeching.
Yeah, if she hears a wild boar screeching, it's definitely going to raise an eyebrow, and that door will open, and she's going to give me a little bit of a glare, but
Peek through the... Just making sure you're not
yeah,
getting in any
right.
trouble.
One of these days,
Deliverance,
she's going to
man.
climb out the window and work her way around the house just to make sure.
You hunted pretty hard through high school and all that stuff. Any point throughout that did your approach to hunting change? I know, like, as a kid, want to get out there and see deer. Then at some point, you want to chase trophies. Was there any point in your younger years where your approach kind of flipped a switch and turned more from playtime to let's get shit done?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, funny enough, when I was a little kid, because I watched all these, 5.5-year-old 160s, 180s, 200s, I thought as a little kid that's what hunting was supposed to be. And because I wasn't seeing a 200-inch deer, it was every single day. That was something I was doing wrong, which went down the rabbit hole over time of trying to figure out what I actually am doing wrong. But when archery season had opened up on my 17th birthday, I believe it was, and my dad and I had gone out on the same parcel. I was hunting over this swamp, and there was a really big trailhead at the edge of the swamp. I had hung the stand back in the spring of that year after scouting it out, shed hunting. I realized how they were utilizing it, and I had a couple cameras in the area, and a few decent bucks were going through. So perfect wind, opening day on my birthday, October 4th. And I apologize, this is when I was 16, not 17. I had gone, sat the stand in the morning, and all I had walk in front of me were a couple button bucks. I had passed them up. My dad and I had met up midday to have some lunch together. And I was telling him, yeah, there's just two button bucks and a couple deer far off, looked like a couple does. And he said, why didn't you shoot the button bucks? Were they not in range? I was like, no, they did exactly what I was hoping, whatever my target buck at that time was.
Target buck.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. So they came right in at 20 yards. And, I'm at that point, I hadn't shot a deer with my bow yet. So it was certainly tempting, but I decided ultimately to pass them up. And because, again, from a young age, I was still kind of a let them grow, let them go kind of, or sorry, let them go, let them grow kind of guy. But at the same time, hungry to put some meat in the freezer. So I decided to pass him up in hopes that a larger buck would come through. And he said, what are you doing? Like you've shot two deer with your gun. You've never shot a deer with your bow. And it's your birthday and it's opening day of archery in Pennsylvania. That's not going to happen every single year. How many times are you going to get to shoot your first archery buck on your birthday, which is coincidentally opening day? So I said, all right, well, if they come back through in the afternoon, 'cause I went back hunting the same stand. I said, if they come back through in the afternoon, I'll take it. He kind of hyped me up about it. So I was actually sitting in the stand and I'm thinking, if a deer comes through, just let it be that big 8 that I had on camera. Let it be that 10 or just some random mystery buck. And I hear rustling in the swamp and I look over, I could see 2 bodies and I was like, uh-oh. I could tell they were younger deer and out pops the 2 button bucks. And leading up into that moment, yeah, I was kind of like, I'm still not going to shoot him. I just won't tell him I saw him. But I actually started shaking a little in that moment that they were walking down the shooting lane. So I kind of decided like, okay, I've got, micro buck fever right now. So they came right in and they read the script perfectly. I picked one out, the one that looked like the larger one, and I drew back, and to this day it's the absolute greatest shot I had ever made. It was a double lung and a clip of the heart, which I don't think I could ever do that again. um at the time I was actually shooting those I want to say they were called biohazard broadheads. They were fixed blade broadheads that actually look like the biohazard sign on like a needle deposit box. And it made the largest exit wound I had ever made on a whitetail. However, zero blood trail. There was plenty of blood on my arrow, but there was not a drop of blood. The deer only went 30 yards. I watched him drop, and I was shaking like a leaf. But my dad's reaction was at that time was probably the greatest thing, just seeing the joy that he had seeing me shoot something with a bow. And I remember talking to him the very next day, and I said, "Hey, I think we're gonna get like a solid 40 to 50 pounds off of this thing at best." And he actually was like, maybe 30. It was a very small deer, but nonetheless, I was very proud and very, very happy about that. But I told him, I said, I don't mind sticking out a lot longer in a season to hold off for a larger deer. And he's like, I entirely understand where you're coming from. You just have to understand that, everybody's got to work their way up to that. And you just need to focus on shooting deer ethically and as safely as you can and as ethically as you can, and start to really understand what whitetail deer do. Because I thought I knew everything by the time I was 16. And to this day, looking back, I'm like, I had no idea what I was doing, right? And to this day, I still don't. But I think that was the most pivotal moment because I thought prior to that I wanted to hold out for the mature bucks. But ever since then, I have held out for the larger deer. And to go without saying, I'm still not at the point where I should be passing up. If it's a 4.5-year-old 120, I'm not the type of guy that should be passing that up with, my history of harvested deer. But I feel like I've become more encompassed with the conservation aspect. And, habitat work and all that kind of stuff. I just want to see a healthy deer population, so it's hard for me to go out. I could still preach to people about chasing mature bucks, but I'll still give a pat on the back to the guy that shoots a yearling because he wants meat. You know what I mean? So I again, long answer short. I feel like I've always had that in me, but I think that was kind of the pivotal moment that I told myself, like, okay, it's time to like enforce it a little bit, even though again, I probably should have waited to do that a few more years.
How old are you now?
I'm 27 now.
Okay. Is there a bigger deer where you're at now or where you were?
Funny enough, I thought I was hunting a lot of very large whitetails when I was in Erie. I was that kid running like 20 trail cameras by the time I was 18 and scouting every bean field over the summer. But after coming to Southern Ontario, I realized that, the hard part in Erie is finding a mature buck. I was able to find a lot of very nice sized deer. 90% of the largest deer that I have found have been 3.5 year olds. In Pennsylvania, I think we're just behind Michigan, I believe, in number of hunters per square mile. And it really shows. And I learned that heavily after moving to Ontario because even though our populations are actually fairly similar on the entirety of Ontario and Pennsylvania sold 800,000 plus tags last year alone, and in Ontario they only did, it was less than 200,000. I want to say 160,000 maybe. And Ontario is the size of 10 US states combined. Granted, when you go way up north, you're not going to find whitetails, but the age structure that I found down here or up here has been drastically different. My number one target buck this year, first time I had ever seen him, we were estimating him at 6.5 or 7.5. I'm kind of leaning on the 7.5 because he's got the biggest gut and the biggest chest I've ever. His brisket is it's immense, and just so many quality mature bucks have shown up this year. So it's definitely kind of an awakening for me compared to Pennsylvania.
Are the deer up there just brutes?
Yeah.
Or is that more of Saskatchewan?
So Saskatchewan is where you're gonna find consistency of those 300 pounders, but I feel the general body size of a whitetail here is certainly larger. Now, I'm assuming a lot of that does have to do with the age structure that I'm seeing here. However, in Southern Ontario, it's almost, I haven't had the pleasure of hunting Iowa, but it's kind of what I would expect Iowa to be like, where I hunt a lot of it. It's probably 80% ag land. And you're getting, when you come across bush, you're probably going to find predominantly 10 to 20 acre parcels. And that's all surrounded by ag as well. So they've got plenty to eat, but their cover isn't as great. However, because there's plenty of food, they're sticking in the corn. They'll bed in the corn until it's gone. And corn, especially this year, there's still to this day a lot of standing corn, and we have a couple feet of snow on the ground. So they're getting a lot of cover out of that. And they're in roadside ditches, man. If you find a ditch on the side of the road that's got sumac growing, you're going to find a mature whitetail buck bedding in there, and they just know they're safe spots.
The hunting pressure just isn't that great up there.
That's another thing that, so I just found out recently where I do most of my whitetail hunting in Southern Ontario on my permission grounds. There's almost zero archery pressure. But what I found out recently is the gun pressure is tremendous. I have a 188 acre parcel that I got permission to deer hunt on this year. And I was hunting it throughout archery season. Never saw a sign of another person, but the way Ontario does their gun season is it actually starts the first week of November. And where I hunt, it's only shotgun and muzzleloader. So they'll do a week of shotgun and muzzleloader for the first week of November. The second week is archery only. Third week is gun again, and so on and so forth. And December 1st through the 7th is the last week of gun. And I can't tell you how many cell camera photos I'm getting and videos of these guys just walking through. And almost every single clip, you could hear them hooting to each other, hollering just to kind of kick up deer and let them know where each other is at. So the gun pressure is crazy, but fortunately, as an archery hunter, there is no rifle hunting down here. At least in the zones that I'm currently hunting.
That's interesting how they do gun bow.
Yeah, it's especially after coming from Pennsylvania. You know, this year it's the Saturday after Thanksgiving, but traditionally it's been the Monday following Thanksgiving, and you get I believe it was one week for buck and or doe, and then an additional week for just doe. And you know, only having rifles out for 1 week late in November to start, I feel like it kind of seems like the right thing to do just to ensure that, you know, most of the breeding is done by then and you're going to get a better fawn crop the following year. But I actually thought it was a terrible thing when I read the regulations after moving here, seeing, oh my God, you know, deer during the rut, they're going to be running into guns everywhere. But it's still very interesting to me. It just seems like deer here, they're hiding a lot better. I don't know if it's because of the standing corn. You know, you can't push that quite as easily, but the age structure just one way or another is getting up there a lot easier than it was in Pennsylvania.
That's fascinating. When is the rut where you're at?
Weirdly enough, this was the earliest that I've seen it. I actually had my target buck, that's 6.5-year-old, or 7.5. We'll just call him 6.5 for the sake of this, but I actually had him dogging a doe heavily. You know, it wasn't just kind of a sniff and trot. On October 25th, he actually came in twice, chasing this doe around, and the doe was heaving. Like, she looked like she had been running all day from this guy, and he ended up, that was October 25th, and I would say probably a majority of the rut action that I have seen this year in particular has been the first week of November. I didn't deer hunt half as much the past couple years in Ontario as much as I did in Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania, usually I would say like the last week of October is probably my favorite week to get out every single year. You know, October 28th and on. It seems like that last week of October, the last couple days into the first few days of November is when I had most of my action. But a lot of my friends will tell me, you know, over on their parcels, they're probably seeing like that November 7th day is kind of a golden day for a lot of my buddies up until like the 13th, 14th. But again, it's going to be heavily based on the does that you have in your area and who's coming into heat sooner than the others.
Not a lot different than where I'm at in Iowa.
No, yeah, I feel like every time I listen to somebody talk about Iowa, you know, a lot of guys will tell you, they actually tell you to stay away from the heat of the rut, and they'll tell you that first and second week of November, stay away, even though it is the most exciting time, you're just going to run into the most pressure at that time. But I have heard a lot about that.
When is the rut in Pennsylvania?
It's the same with Southern Ontario. I mean, like I said, the last couple days of October into the first week of November is when I tend to see most of the action. I would say 5 or 6 years ago, it felt like the second week of November is when it started to really kick up. I remember it was that November 7th, the November 8th, and November 13th were kind of my 3 golden days. I would schedule off of work, you know, months in advance just to ensure I got out on those days. They felt like the lucky days for rut activity. But recently it's been a couple days of October.
How long have you been up there?
I've been in Ontario since 2021. I believe I had moved up here.
So you enjoy not having to deal with as many hunters?
It's so there's an interesting dynamic to that. So 100%, it's very nice to go out and, not have the public land. Pennsylvania hunters, you'll carry in your stand, you set up, and then next thing you know, within 10 minutes, somebody's setting up 30 yards from you. But the dynamic with that is public land in southern Ontario is essentially non-existent. Um, I actually had to apply for a public land tag on one of I believe there's 4 or 5 parcels within 2 hours of me, and every single one of them, other than one is around 400 acres. The other 3 or 4 are all under 100 acres. I mean, it's tough. And the one that I had to apply for, they give out 5 or 6 archery tags and 5 or 6 gun tags. So you end up applying. If you get it, you pay, I believe my fee was $85. And the only reason I had actually wanted to get that is because I had permission on just a bean field. This guy owned a hedgerow on either side of the bean field and 0% of the tree line. The tree line started the public ground. I wanted to get about 20 yards out of the field edge and set my stand up. Again, you have to have that public land tag. So I got that, and you could still walk the public land in the off season. You could hike it, even though again it's very small, so it's not necessarily hiking. But I went shed hunting through it and kind of learned a little bit about it. I was mostly curious about this swamp thicket that is on the southeastern corner of this parcel. And I was assuming this is where the bucks I was seeing in my bean and alfalfa fields, I was assuming this is where they were bedding. Come shed season, I was able to kind of, pinpoint it. That is where the bucks were bedding. I found the doe bedding. And you get 2 tags to put on either blinds or tree stands on the public ground if you draw the tag. So I was able to get a couple of those, put the stand right where I wanted it, and I ended up getting about 70 or 80 yards off of the field edge there. And I got another stand a little bit further out, but that was just for an odd wind day kind of thing. And one of those things where if I wanted to squeeze in after work without worrying about bumping deer, I had that stand there. So it was nice to have that, but I apologize. I keep sidetracking a heck of a lot.
You're
but
good.
Because of the lack of public land, let alone free access, any private parcel that would give somebody permission to hunt, it's been taken. So I had actually counted, I was 0 for 38 before I got my first yes. 37 of the 38 no's were, we appreciate you asking, but we already have somebody hunting, or the owner themselves hunted. And only one of them was, the very anti-hunter kind of yelled at me kind of situation. And yeah, 0 for 38 before I got my first yes. So it's very hard to get access anywhere around me. I was very blessed. My good friend, Jeremy, he is one of my guides for the outfit, and he's been a diehard deer hunter his whole life. He grew up in the area. He knows the farmers, so he has a few parcels, and he was kind enough to get me onto his parcels as well. So the first 3 or 4 years I was here, I almost neglected deer entirely. I would make a trip back to Pennsylvania for a few days and made that count when I could, but Ontario deer hunting up until this year was not necessarily a serious situation for me. I just focused so much of my time on waterfowl and turkey, especially because of guiding. But this year, I got eaten up so much more by whitetail than I ever had before.
all these pieces that are taken, do you think the landowners are just giving out permission or are they leased out?
It's so funny enough, I actually learned through guiding, technically, you're legally not allowed to lease your land for hunting rights in Ontario. So it's kind of a gray area. It definitely still happens. Um, Before I knew this, I even tried leasing land myself. Uh, Especially, if we had a big couple thousand goose feed that I wanted to get my clients on, I would offer a good chunk of change just to hunt it for a day. But the farmers in this area are very respectful to the people who respect them. So if they have a hunter who has been hunting it, even if they're not planning on hunting the next day, they might have been hunting it for the past 10 years and they don't want to cross them. And that's worked against me in a lot of ways, but it's actually worked in my favor in a lot of ways as well. A lot of the farmers who have allowed us to waterfowl hunt, they'll actually call me and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry to bug, but I had a gentleman stop and he wanted to ask permission to hunt. I didn't know if you'd be coming out. I know you usually message us, but he wanted to hunt tomorrow and I wanted you to give him a yes or no because you've been helping out as much as you can around here, so it's kind of your place to say yes or no." And it's crazy to hear somebody who pays taxes on a few hundred acres tell us like it's your place to say yes or no. It's a different dynamic in that aspect, but because of that aspect, a lot of those farmers, they'll just say, somebody came here 10 years ago and they've never given us an issue. So I think we just kind of want to let them have their little honey hole.
That's fascinating. So you mentioned the outfitting a little bit. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So actually when I had first moved to Ontario, I knew outside of my wife and her family, I knew nobody. And my wife is 100% Portuguese. Her parents are first generation Canadians. Her grandparents were born and raised in Azores Islands. So they weren't into hunting other than she had two uncles who Portuguese people are very big into rabbit hunting. So one of her uncles was very big into dogs, having them in competitions and running them for rabbits. But he would do pheasants and any other small game, but that was pretty much the extent of it. He would do the deer hunt here and there. Her other uncle enjoys deer hunting as well. Um, but he is on a farm, kind of same situation I just explained a minute ago, where they've had permission on that and they don't let anybody else hunt there. So I was kind of in the dark with hunting places, and I had actually posted in a Facebook page about waterfowl hunting, and I was asking questions about this one spot because the regulations here are very they're not black and white at all. They're pretty hard to understand. So I just wanted clarification, and a gentleman named Andrew Cutts had responded, and he's ever since has been one of my best friends. He's a local who he knows every spot to hunt. He knows all the rules and regulations. And he said, "Hey, I'll show you around that spot and kind of explain what you can and can't do." And we're going out on opening day in a couple weeks. I'm going with a group of friends who are actually local guides, if you'd like to join. So, of course, we go out opening day, we're hunting, and I was filming all of my hunts for the past, as long as I could remember, really. And I showed up with camera gear, and the guys were like, "Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, we're fine with the cameras. Let's do it." And I ended up getting along with them really well, and I was showing them some of my past work, and they're like, "Listen, like, you obviously know what you're doing with waterfowl. You've been doing that a long time. You know how to call, you know XYZ, and you film. That's awesome. Like, are you interested? Do you want to be part of the company?" And again, as a child, all I ever wanted to do was be a quote unquote professional hunter. That was the easiest yes I've ever had. So I got in with them. At the time, they were going by Running River Outfitters. He's the owner of that is now I hired him as my guide, Jeremy Campbell, and our other friend at the time, Darcy Mossberger. So I got in with them, and that year we just kind of hit the ground running. It was scouting every single day, and more scouting than I had ever thought possible. And we were hunting hard, man. It was a lot of ducks on farm ponds, a lot of geese in the open cornfields, and that was the first year I'd moved up here. Again, I believe 2021. And following that year, we kind of had a falling out with one of the other guys. So we decided to separate and do our own thing. And I said, listen, I'm going to start my own outfit, and I want to do it a far different way from the way they were kind of going about it. But I'd started back then, and ever since we've just kind of been going hard at it. Last year we kind of slowed down. My wife was pregnant, and Jeremy, my lead guide, his wife was pregnant. We had our first sons a month apart. So we kind of slowed down on that end a little bit, and I feel like the few years prior to that, we just overworked ourselves to no extent because it was a secondary job for both of us. We still each worked full time, and Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday we had clients out, and it's an absolute blast, but it certainly beat us up a little bit, and we kind of wanted some time to ourselves. So last year we still took clients out, but we just kind of slowed down a little bit, and we've kind of kept that same pace this year, but we're looking to actually switch full time next year, depending on how some other things go. So yeah, it's been quite a ride. It's been an awesome experience on that end, moving to Canada.
Are you going after the honkers or ducks? What do you go after up there?
So usually when people book with us, we like to kind of give them the option, like, do you have a preference, or what we recommend is, we'll put you on the best hunt there is, whether that's geese or ducks. Obviously, if they're both in season, which most of the season, they're both running pretty comparably. So we like to try to find, if we find a really big duck feed in a field that we could get in with the right wind, we're going to hunt that if we don't have as good of a goose feed. So we're really just going to pick the best feed possible. I would say predominantly we're going to find a goose feed. And even when we find one, we like to have our concrete answer 2 days as to where we're hunting 2 days prior, and have at least 2 or 3 backup options. So a lot of the time we have switched. We'll tell the clients on Thursday, if it's a Saturday hunt, hey, we have in this town, we have a goose feed, so prep for that. Get your BB shells if you've got them. And then the next day we might say, hey, we actually just loaded up on this farm pond with greenheads and gadwall or whatever it may be, and bring out your number 4s.
Greenheads and what?
Greenheads and gadwall. Gadwall are another different type of puddler duck. So they're what we call a gray duck. When they're flying, they have this grayish look to them, and they're gorgeous, gorgeous ducks. But certainly not as prevalent, not as wanted per se as a Drake greenhead. But I'm a very big gadwall fan. Funny enough, I just harvested a couple just 3 days ago, and my wife cooked it up, and it was her first time ever having gadwall. She just cooked that up for dinner last night with a pasta, and it was incredible,
Really?
But yeah, they're just another puddler duck.
Okay, so when you're up there duck hunting, it sounds like you're primarily hitting fields.
I would say for the most part. This year's a little bit different because we actually got a quarry. And as a duck hunter, as a waterfowl hunter in general, if you get permission on a quarry, that's kind of like hitting the lottery. So this quarry especially, because it's 13 or 14 little islands spread throughout this quarry, giving these ducks and geese all these little back alleys that they could squeeze into. There's a little honey hole for every single wind that you could imagine. And because it's a filled in quarry, there's a lot of deep pockets. So it'll stay open throughout the winter a lot longer while the farm ponds are freezing up. And this quarry is just so big to the point that we could hunt it once a week and notice zero difference with the birds reacting to pressure. So we got very lucky on that end. And in between, we're still hunting plenty of fields, but now that it's in the late season and we have the ice eaters running up there, I think that's going to take up most of our hunts. We're probably going to hunt that twice a week, truthfully, with how many birds are still in the area and how many birds are actually going to be on that, with it being one of the only open water sources, other than a few river pockets here and there.
How many ducks would you see on an average day up there?
Oh, this is a question that haunts me because I don't know if it's because if you couldn't tell with all the sidetracking, I have really bad ADHD. And when I look at a flock of ducks, my excitement, no matter what, it just goes through the roof. So I'll look at a flock of realistically 300 ducks and be like, yeah, there's 1,000, knowing it's not 1,000. But I would say realistically, on a good hunt with the right weather conditions, we'll probably see this time of year, we'll see upwards of 500 to 600 ducks. Within eyesight, buzzing around. You'll see the same flock buzz around, same flock of 30 buzz around here and there multiple times. So you feel like you're seeing a couple thousand, but over the years of guiding, you start to really understand, like, okay, a lot of the birds that I'm seeing are the same birds, just kind of pond hopping. But realistically, you'll see 600 ducks on a good day.
How big is this quarry?
I want to say, I actually had the number. We mapped it out on Onyx, and I've got a million different numbers going through my head. I would say it's about, the quarry itself, where there's water, is about 100, and it might have been 17 or 127 acres where there's water. And there's also two little
Do they go by acres or hectares up there?
No, they do go by acres, at least everybody that I speak to. I have had a few people, I actually get a lot of clients who are international. I shouldn't say a lot, but a lot of people internationally that have moved to Canada, or they just come down for a hunt. They go by hectares, and it blows my mind. I can't understand it. Somebody explained it to me one day. He was from Brazil, of all places, and he explained hectares to me, and it made so much sense as to why they use that. But today I couldn't tell you a single word of what it was. It has to be from somebody who knows that firsthand experience, if that makes sense.
We're getting really sidetracked, but millimeters makes more sense for like wrenches. Just so much more simple.
It does. I get that all the time, and I'll still defend the American way.
Is gas by liters up there?
Yes, we go by the liter. So you'll see, like right now, I think it's like a $1.39 a liter, something like that.
So weird. Anyways, so this is a pretty good sized quarry then.
Yeah, it's definitely sizable. Like I said, there's a lot of deep pockets, so we would hope it stays open a lot longer. But this year we've just been slammed with the cold. It has been freezing temperatures, and I know the ice fishermen are happy, and I've got a few buddies who are diehard ice fishermen, and it's been a few years since they've had a long season, but this year they'll be getting that for sure.
It makes a lot of sense now that you mention not really pressuring the duck population away, especially being that big.
Mm. Right.
Like you can go out there and not flush all the ducks away when you're getting ready to hunt.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually, crazy enough, they actually roost just off of the quarry. So on the same property, there's a half acre kind of like pond. It used to be connected to the quarry, but they made a little they extended their logging road to cut over it just to make the trip for their trucks shorter. So it just kind of parceled off this little half acre pond, and they tend to roost in there most nights. So when we hunt in the morning, they're on the completely opposite side of the quarry from where we're at, of course, depending on the wind. But we try to do our morning hunts nowhere near just to keep them, comfortable on the roost. So we'll set up at least 500 yards away, and then we can watch them just pour in and out of that roost. And we won't hunt the roost, just to kind of keep it a little bit better for everybody else that's hunting in the area. We don't want to be the roost shooters, because I've had hunts ruined because people will go jump shoot the roost, and those birds have a completely different mindset. They're just trying to get out, and they'll end up on a different water elsewhere and a different feed because they were shot off the roost. So we let them get up when they want to get up. And most of the time we'll hunt the quarry in the afternoons, actually. So it's been working out perfect for us on that end.
When you're hunting something like that, the quarry, for example, are you sitting up on a field adjacent to the quarry, or are you guys using... So let me back up for a second. So I had another guest on early on, and you'd really like that one. We talked about goose hunting the whole time. He's from
Yeah.
Missouri, goes down to Arkansas. I think he lived in Louisiana for a while.
No, he's got a good waterfowl.
Yep. You'd like to connect with him. He wants to be a duck guide.
Oh,
I'll
no
put you in
kidding.
touch with him. But
Yeah, absolutely.
he was telling me about some of the places he hunted. Might have been Mississippi.
Mhm.
Yeah, he went to Ole Miss or something. But just like permanent blinds on the marsh, and the ones that have like the basement built in where they can
Yeah.
cook up some breakfast and stuff like that. What kind of setups do you have up there?
So we do have a lot of permanent blinds. A lot of my blinds actually get their style from when I was hunting diver ducks on Lake Erie out of Erie, Pennsylvania. Our Ducks Unlimited chapter would go out to Presque Isle on Lake Erie, and we put up roughly, give or take, 70 blinds every year. And they're very similar to what he would have explained, minus the dining hall situation. They're not quite as
Dining.
big. Yeah, they're not quite as big. There's a lot that you could fit 5 or 6 guys in, but essentially it's kind of just like a wooden box with a bench seat that goes across. And I'm sure you've seen your fair share of duck blinds where they have the cutout over top where you have the reeds going. There's kind of a wall in front of you. You got the reeds extending up, and then you got reeds falling off of the wall, or sorry, the roof over top of you, so you don't have that big open spot. And then just a bench seat across the middle, couple shelves. Very simple stuff on that line. So I got a lot of my inspiration again from hunting those. So we have a lot set up like that. But on the far side, we always have a little bench that we could put a Foreman grill. And that gentleman I had mentioned earlier, Andrew Cutts, he was actually previously a Michelin star chef, and he cooks breakfast every single hunt. And it's I don't care if we shoot a 8-man limit of ducks and geese, the breakfast is the best part. But I actually had I was guiding on Lake St. Clair last year, and sorry, last 2 years, and I actually had a 24-foot pontoon that we turned into one of those very big box style blinds. And same situation, we had our little section for a George Foreman grill. I forget the name of the grill that we actually put on there. It was larger than your traditional George Foreman's, but we had extra storage area. I mean, pontoon boats will make the greatest duck blind out there. You just got to be careful because, of course, the way you build them, they could turn into a wind sail really quick. So, got to make sure you have the right motor, the right weights on there. It could get dangerous if you're not smart with it. But I've had some of my most memorable, funnest times on that pontoon boat.
So tell me this, when you're guiding and doing some of this stuff, are you going out and setting up the decoys that morning? How many decoys? The numbers he was telling me were pretty fascinating, especially his snow geese setups, like thousands of decoys. I'm like, holy crap, man.
Snow geese and speckle bellies are an entirely different game. We don't get the feeds in southern Ontario like they do. There's a couple places in northern Ontario that it's worth hunting them, but not necessarily where we're at. So we don't hunt them. You'll just see the migrating flocks fly over. If you hear them, you'll look up. They're sky high, but you could see them here and there. But I would say probably 90% of the time we are setting up our spread the day of the hunt. So if we have our clients, some situations we'll actually have the clients drive up to a location because we don't have lodging or anything like that. So they'll come from a hotel and we'll say, hey, shooting light is at 6:30, so meet us here at 5:45. We'll get you ready. We'll go over the safety guidelines and everything, but they'll get there at 5:45, but we'll probably get out there at 4:30, 5 o'clock. We'll set up the spread. It's going to be a lot earlier this time of year now that we're going to be battling ice, even with the ice heaters going. But we'll get the heaters kicked on, get them running nice and hot for when they get in the blinds, and try to start breakfast, first thing in the morning if we can, but we'll just do maybe a couple eggs, and then usually by lunchtime, if we're still out, we'll do some sandwiches or something along the lines. But this time of year, like what we'll be running on Sunday, you try to match the flock as best as you can. So if you look out on, here's the water hole we're planning on hunting for this wind. There's 10 dozen geese and 100 ducks sitting out there. We're going to throw out a really good floater spread, and then we'll put a lot of silos up along the land bridge. And we'll run shells and full bodies across the ice, kind of making it look like they're crawling out of the water onto the ice into the cornfield to eat. And plenty of floaters floating as well. We'll probably do 7 or 8 dozen. And I think our key thing is movement. So we'll have a jerk rig running, but we're also going to have 2 or 3 spinning wing mojos, and my absolute favorite, it's kind of like the cream of the crop for a decoy spread in my opinion on the water, is Lucky Duck decoys. Has a few brands. We use the Lucky Duck ones. They have these splashers. They kind of look like those butt up mallard decoys, but they have a little bilge pump, so it's got this little hook. It sprays the water, it splashes the butt of the decoy, and it kind of makes the decoy flap around. But that splash, when you look at it from an aerial view, if you're using a drone or whatever it may be, that adds so much realism to the spread as opposed to just stagnant water and nothing's moving. But that decoy butt fluttering back and forth and just splashing water everywhere, if you get just 3 or 4 of those into a duck hole, it makes it look like everything is splashing around. And when you look at live ducks, that's the number one thing they're doing. They move. They don't stand still when they're feeding in water.
How much are these duck decoys?
Too much, man. Too much.
Not as expensive as the DSD decoys.
That's the first thing my mind went to. I love Dave Smith decoys, but I just saw on Facebook just yesterday there was the 2 of the quill goose decoys. And I think the guy was selling them aftermarket for $500 just for the pair, the 2. Now, I think Dave Smith makes by far the greatest looking decoys imaginable, but I'm very blessed. We have an account with Tangle Free, which helps out tremendously. They give a good discount, but even then, man, it adds up really quick. But you'll look for a dozen decoys without flocked heads, without flocked bodies, just painted. A dozen decoys with the anchors and a 12-slot bag. That alone, you're gonna run yourself easily $150 for a decent dozen. You can go to Walmart though. You could get a dozen on sale for $50. You don't necessarily need to have the greatest looking decoys. I think it's more so for a hunter himself type of thing. I think the flocked heads are important, but after that, I think we're just purchasing something the ducks would never notice, but to us, it makes a difference. It's a confidence booster.
You mentioned painted. Are they hand painted or what?
Actually, so when I was mentioning that, just a standard store-bought painted decoy is just a regular old decoy. It's just plastic. It doesn't have flocking on the head, so it'll have a little bit of a glare when the sun's hitting it. Um, so you add the flocking that entirely gets rid of the glare, and it makes them pop out pretty nicely.
What do you mean flocking?
So it's I know it's not too common anymore. When you were younger, do you remember, did your parents ever do like that white fake snow? Would they ever put something like that on a Christmas tree? Or, yeah. So that you could consider that flocking. So if you think of a Drake mallard, right? He's got that green head. So you'll take that green flocking, and there's a special glue. You'll rough up the head of the decoy, and you can put on this special glue, and then you kind of sift it on almost like you're setting a foothold trap for a coyote. You sift the dirt, you sift that on.
Kind of like if some of those bakers are sprinkling the powder on the cake.
Yeah, exactly.
There you
Exactly.
go.
So, yeah, you're just kind of sprinkling that on, and again, the number one thing that you're doing with that is getting rid of the glare. If your decoy's sitting in the water, it's gonna get wet, of course. The head of the decoy will still get wet, and on sunny days, the sun's gonna reflect off of the plastic and give off an unnatural glare. If you look at live ducks, you're never gonna get a glare coming off a Drake Greenhead's head, right? On decoys, you will, and a lot of people will tell you that it'll flare ducks. Now, it will, in the late season especially. You don't have to worry about it too much in the early season, but they really do smarten up to something like that. So that flocking, you could buy it store-bought with flocked heads, or there's decoys that they flock the entire body on them.
So fascinating. I've never been duck hunting before.
No, you've never duck hunted, eh? I know Iowa is not necessarily known for its duck hunting as much as it is for its deer, but have you ever turkey?
I think turkey hunting's pretty boring. I used to turkey hunt quite a bit when I was younger, and I think I would still enjoy it a little bit more if I actually pursued it with a bow, but I think it's kind of boring a little bit.
Do you? Yeah. I grew up loving it, man. That was kinda I cared more about turkey hunting as a little kid just because of the calling and the screaming aspect. And, some of my favorite memories of hunting was growing up in Ohio. There was this public parcel that we used to always go to, and it was so big. You could go out opening day of turkey, and you'll never see another guy hunting it. But, we would go up this crazy logging road. It was the biggest cliff I've ever walked in my life. You get all the way to the top, and you take a breather, you go all the way down, and then you do it one more time. It was just the biggest roller coaster of a hill on a logging road. But I'm telling you, man, every time we got out there, the screaming of the gobblers is just it just went through my blood and it just stayed there, you know. But I think that calling and answering aspect is kind of what drew me in so heavily. My number one hunt that I want to do is Colorado elk, just because again, you know, the calling, the answering, and just the vocalizations of it. I've always had a thing for that. So turkey has always been another one of those things, just like waterfowl for me.
Do you have turkeys where you're at?
Yeah, I actually guide turkeys as well. So we do ducks, goose, and turkeys in southern Ontario. They actually reintroduced the turkey population as recent as 1984. They started with 274 turkeys, and they're well over 100,000 now. It's one of the more successful rehabilitations of a wildlife species that there's been.
Eastern?
Yep, they actually traded back. This tell you how different of a time it was in the 80s. To get those turkeys, they actually traded moose and grouse to a few different states. So Michigan, Vermont, maybe New Hampshire, maybe Maine. I believe there was 4 or 5 different states, but they traded. I don't know how many moose, I don't know how many grouse, but they traded it, got a total of 274 birds, and they're actually somehow turned 274 into 100,000 plus, and it's growing. But They did a really good job with that. You certainly don't see that today. Canada doesn't trade its moose away for another animal.
Do you have moose where you're at?
Not where I'm at. If you go, I would say 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours north, you start getting into the moose. 5 to 6 hours, you start really getting into them. But you're gonna go up into northern Ontario to get a bulk of your moose. A lot of guys around here will have moose camp. Usually they're on a anywhere between a 5 to an 8 hour hike up north to get to their camp.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
What about upland?
It's actually there's a lot of grouse. Not even where I'm at, but it's really weird when it comes to Ontario because if you look at anywhere, uh, picture where Toronto is, go draw a line straight west to the western edge, like basically Michigan, and anywhere south. So that portion of southern Ontario is, I mean, it's a lot like I said, right? Like 80% agriculture, 20% bush, maybe. But everything, if you get at least an hour north of Toronto, everything is bush. You run into zero ag land at a certain point. Up there, the upland is just it's tremendous. There's when it comes to grouse, especially, it's otherworldly. Those guys would go out in Pennsylvania. It was the craziest thing to see a grouse in Northwest Pennsylvania, I should say, because our hunting camp closer to Tiddie, Pennsylvania, like Pittsburgh-ish, kind of an hour out of there. We had a good amount of grouse, but yeah, Southern Ontario, no. Hour north of Toronto, oh yeah.
Have you ever been on pheasant?
Yeah, we actually had a pen of pheasants we raised a few years when I was in Erie. Uh, we did a lot of public land hunting for pheasants in Pennsylvania. In Ontario, I don't know if they do. Like in Pennsylvania, they release the birds every year, obviously, but I don't know of anything in Ontario pheasant wise. At least there is plenty of pheasant farms that you could go to, but it's kind of like the pay per bird type of deal.
Oh, there's a crap ton in Iowa, man.
Yeah, you guys got all them cornfields they're stocked up in.
They were doing pretty well. I've never been grouse hunting.
Really? I've tried it, but again, I mean, I knew I was kind of just chasing a diamond in the rough most of the time that I've done it. Um, but yeah, I got my buddies here have all been up north and did the grouse hunt, but the only issue, I mean, I've eaten grouse, they taste fantastic, but the only issue is when you hunt them, a lot of the time you're going to be walking miles down a logging road, and you could get within 15 feet of most of these grouse, and you just, whatever you want to shoot them with, you're going to shoot them. It's not so much a game bird as much as it seems like it's domesticated. They don't know what humans are, and they're just not spooked by humans in the same sense. Like if you flush a pheasant, you can get really close to a nice pheasant. You had no idea about it unless your dog picks up on it. And I've had hunts where I step on pheasants. If we don't have a dog out, you almost step on a pheasant and they flush out from underneath your feet. You think a helicopter's taking off underneath you. It's not so much the same with grouse, from what I've been led to believe.
So is there anything unique to hunt where you're at that maybe I don't know about? Wolves?
Wolves are kind of like the moose. They're a little bit further north. However, in this area, it's kind of like one of those rumors, right? So coyotes and wolves do have the ability to interbreed. And my father-in-law, of all people, actually does have a picture on he had a horse farm. My wife used to do the royal, like equestrian. She was very big into that. So they had a horse farm, and he actually has a picture of, I mean, you would look at this thing and think it's the biggest coyote you've ever seen in your life. And there's a couple other locals who had a picture of this, and there was an M&R officer, Ministry of Natural Resources, who confirmed it was a crossbreed. I mean, it's kind of more so like a fabled thing people could potentially target here. I think aside from that, it's very comparable to Iowa. We've got this similar small game with rabbits, squirrels, uh, the upland birds. Um, I can't think of anything that would be like quote unquote exotic in a sense. But yeah, if you go further north, you do get into that wolf population, the moose, and I guess the most uncommon knowledge animal that we actually have in Ontario is elk. It actually kind of took me, yeah, it took me by surprise. So in Pennsylvania, they have the most prized elk herd in the world. It is one of the hardest tags to draw. I have 8 preference points for an archery bull tag, and I think I still have like a 2% chance of drawing next year. Um, so they did a reintroduction like Ontario did with the turkeys. Um, they did the reintroduction of elk in Pennsylvania, and Ontario tried to emulate that. And it's not half as impressive as the bulls, like, the age structure and the class of bulls that you get in Pennsylvania. Um, it's not, I don't believe it's as big either, just in terms of the herd size. But they did do that here. They introduced elk, and everything that I've gathered, it's kind of, they're trying to put it in the best way. It's not an impressive herd, but they are there.
Is it pretty hard to draw an elk tag in Ontario?
I don't believe that they are even doing actually no. I'm thinking of something entirely different. Disregard that statement. I don't know how hard it is to draw a tag. I know it's very limited, but I actually haven't put in for that one yet, which kind of sounds like a sin to say myself. Anytime I think about elk, I think about the Pennsylvania elk and the desperateness that I feel that Colorado had gotten rid of their over the counter tags. But that takes up most of my elk thoughts, but I'd have to look into that to see. I just know that my buddies have told me, yeah, if you draw an elk tag, don't get too excited. It's not an easy hunt. You're not going to see many, if any at all, and you could shoot a small one, and that'd be very very impressive. People don't expect to shoot them, type of deal, if that makes sense.
What's number one on your hit list, regardless of location?
Kodiak grizzly with my bow.
Really?
Yeah, there's something about the adrenaline you get out of that. I mean, of course, grizzly bear, let alone a Kodiak Island grizzly bear, is one of, if not the ultimate predator, unless we're talking about lions in Africa. But something, Alaska has always been such a big thought of mine. It's always been embedded in my head. It's the last frontier. It's true wild, right? Like, I can't even fathom what breathing in that air in Alaska would be like, and just the senses that you would feel, but let alone going after North America's greatest predator and on an island where you can't legally hunt without a guide because it's so dangerous. It's something about that, just all the freedom that you'd feel out there, the way that your senses would react, and just the crap in your pants the whole time while being in the coolest place on earth. That just sounds like a perfect mixture to me. I think that'd be incredible.
Maybe someday, man.
Someday it's got to happen. I don't care what I have to do. I'll become Jim Shockey's best friend and tell him I'll guide for him for free for 10 years if I just get to be up there. One day.
Heck, I'd even marry his daughter if it meant going up there.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind Ava Shockey myself. That'd be ideal. I hope my wife didn't hear that, but if she saw Ava Shockey, I think she could understand.
Celebrity crush. Before we wrap this up, man, I usually like to have each guest share a couple of their most embarrassing hunting stories.
Oh man. Whew.
Kind of bringing the real stuff.
Yeah, that's throwing the kitchen sink. The first one that does come to my mind, um, I was never told, I was never diagnosed. I never got checked for being an insomniac, but I'm terrible. If I have the slightest bit of excitement, I don't sleep. You know, I was nervous just about this and I had trouble sleeping last night, but I went out on an archery hunt and I'll never forget the trail camera I had checked the day prior to going out on this archery hunt. I got the largest buck I had ever seen. This was in Pennsylvania, and to this day, I'm telling you, this was a 180, 185 all day. I mean, the biggest pig of a deer I've ever seen, and he was daylight. He was like middle daylight too. It was like 1 o'clock, but it was mid-October. So I start freaking out, and anything I knew at that point, I was telling myself, like, I might have jumped him just checking that camera. The camera was a field edge, and it was 1 o'clock on a regular October day. He uh he had to have been bedding within 100 yards from there. It was my thinking, but I knew I was going October 16th. I'm going in and I'm sitting all day, even if it's a 70-degree day. I didn't care what the weather was. I was going in with the right wind, figuring out what my access was. I was sitting all day. I didn't sleep one bit that night. Um, I ended up like I kid you not 1 minute. And I go out and I set up probably 2 hours early before light, middle of October. And I end up getting in the tree and I start to feel nauseous just from not sleeping at all. But I still was so excited. There was no falling asleep in the tree stand. And I end up by 8:45 nearly crawling home because 17 feet up in this tree, I just start puking my brains out and I'm almost in tears. Like truthfully, I was tearing up because I was like, this buck hears me, he's gonna smell this, blah. So I end up just about crawling out and I just start profusely sweating. It wasn't even that hot yet, but I just got sick to my stomach. And ultimately it was a pretty good hike in, and I'm carrying my stand on my back with my quick sticks and ended up having to throw them off of my back. And instead of coming out my mouth, we had to fight demons on the other end. So threw that stuff off my back, dealt with that whole situation. I mean, this was just a walking nightmare. And finally I make it back home by like maybe 10:30, and my dad just looks at me. He goes, "You missed?" Yeah, I looked sick to the point he thought I just missed the biggest buck of my life. And I was like, tell you the truth, I have to go change my pants. And later on that day, I realized I left my tree stand and sticks back in the woods. Um, so that's definitely the one that comes to my mind pretty quick. And then I would say the other one.
Did that deer ever show up on camera?
No, I never. That was the first and only picture I had ever gotten of that buck. Um, funny enough, that same exact camera, same exact location. About a month later, I got another one and done. It was of a buck with three main beams coming out of his right side. I mean, three separate pedicles. It was crazy to see, and then just a regular one on the left. He wasn't a monster by any means, but he was certainly an older buck, nice big brisket, maybe 120, 130-inch buck. But when you see three main beams coming out of one side, I've seen one or two other bucks with two main beams on one side, but that was something else. But yes, same camera, same location, 1 month apart, only picture I had ever gotten. Um, and I think the only other embarrassing story that's popping in my head right off the bat, I actually got shot by another hunter. Um,
Really?
so I was telling you, Presque Isle, the Lake Erie shore, we put up the duck blinds, and I'd taken my buddy out. This is his first hunt ever. Yeah, I introduced him. I got him excited to go hunting, and I took him on a duck hunt. And we were shooting ducks in the morning. We were having a good day, and he had shot a few mergansers by this point, which are kind of a quote unquote trash duck. You really can't eat them. They are encapsulated with mercury. You eat enough of those ducks, you will get sick. We end up having a hen merganser fly in between us and the duck blind to the right of us. So these two teenagers came in and they set up a good hour after legal light. So we had been there for a couple hours already, and they set up and we watched this hen merganser. We just decided to pass her up. Even my buddy's first hunt, he should shoot everything, but he's like, no, we're not going to eat. Like, I'll eat these three, but we're going to stop there. So if I can't eat it, I don't want to shoot it, which that's the greatest thing you want to hear from a first time hunter. But we just watched this. We're watching this duck go in between us and that blind. And you look out, that blind's about 70, I would say 70 yards away. And as I'm looking out, I just feel poof. And you hear all these BBs hit the side of the blind. And I felt something like, if it's kind of like a bee sting, right? It hit me 7 or 8 times, right around this area. God bless. This is a true guardian angel moment. I didn't get hit once in the face. I didn't have glasses on. If a pellet hit me in my eye, it's steel shot from 70 plus yards away. It's gonna do damage. I had 7 or 8 welts across my chest. So in that moment, that's nothing to be embarrassed about. On their end, obviously, on our end, it's freak accident. We're trying to, realize what just happened. And I look over and I try to yell out of frustration because we just got shot. And I try to yell, and these kids are literally they start kind of getting real wired, and they just walk away back to their vehicle and they leave. They left 24 decoys sitting in the water. But when I first got up after kind of having a panic attack for a minute, I just got shot, making sure we're not cut open. I try to yell out to these guys, and truthfully, I was probably trying to say what the F, really get into it after you get hit. And I ended up going almost to a T, just kind of like that. And it's in a sense, it's a good thing that that's what came out, because 7 or 8 minutes after we got off the phone we had to call the state, not state troopers, the park troopers, because they had an office right at the head of this, right at the head of Presque Isle, and we're like, you got to get these guys. Ultimately, never found out who it was. Nonetheless, after that conversation, we're sitting there, and my buddy looks at me, and he's a quiet guy. He looks at me and he just goes, I just cherry red in the face, and we were able to laugh it off. But I guess it's not necessarily too embarrassing, but when your blood's boiling like that, you have no idea what's coming out of your mouth. I didn't know what you could have told me I said anything in that moment, but
That's pretty funny.
it was a roller coaster for sure. But we got to end this off with your embarrassing story first, though. I'm not going to end on that note, and you get to ask everybody. I'm sure you've shared yours once or twice, but
Episode number 1, man, there's a few of them. I did a solo podcast to get her started.
yeah, I was just listening to the podcast you released recently with the gentleman hunting public land, Iowa. And then after that had ended, it clicked over to your first one. I haven't finished through that yet, but that'll be tonight's watch. So I look forward to the embarrassment.
The one you should check out is
The gentleman from Mississippi and Louisiana.
Chase Trip from Missouri.
Chase Trip from Missouri. Got him. I'll check that out.
All right, man.
All right. It's been a pleasure, Mitch. I appreciate it.
I'll save those embarrassing stories for you to catch tonight, but they're out there.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right. Take care, buddy.
You too. Thank you very much, Mitch.